If we could talk about the costs involved. As I understand, a bulk of this burden goes on local governments.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about how much of a cost, the extensive cost that is required to sort of collect waste, to figure out how to dispose of it, and all these other elements?
Well, it's actually a big cost for the local authorities. In some of the urban areas where I have or where we are working, waste management represents almost a third of the budget of the local authority, and there are several components. If you have a landfill, you need to manage your landfill. You need to organize the collections, as you were saying, and that means putting fuel in your trucks, maintaining your trucks, and paying your staff. And then you need to process various elements of the waste. So as it's working today, it's actually not an economically viable activity, and that's why so many of the local authorities are reluctant to get more engaged, because for them it's a cost center, it's not a profit-making center. So this is also something that we are working on, and it's not very complicated, because basically the local authorities will pay for their waste management through some small subventions they get from the central government, but mostly from the property tax. So there is also an issue of how do you collect the property tax properly, right? So that you get sufficient amount of money. Some local authorities who have embarked in a real waste management program have set up separate user fees. And there was a bit of a resistance at the beginning.
Can you describe what that is exactly?
Well, basically, instead of paying just your property tax, you will pay on a monthly base maybe 50 rupee or 100 rupee for your garbage to be collected. There was some resistance in some area about this, because people saw that as an additional tax, and nobody wants to pay that. But in areas where the service has actually improved significantly, I tell you, the gain in terms of political gain and financial gain have been so big that surrounding municipalities have been willing to copy that system. So it's always the same thing. If you provide no service, people are not happy to pay taxes. But if they see a significant improvement, they are happy, especially when it's not a very high amount. So, but it's very essential that the local authorities collect and allocate sufficient money to waste management.
When we come back, we're going to take a look at some of the programs taking place here in Sri Lanka. Both the government and the UN have carried out some very successful projects. This is Global Perspectives on MTV Sports. We'll be right back after this short commercial break. Any visitor coming to Colombo after a number of years will immediately comment on the city's cleanliness. There is obviously a difference from many years ago. And unlike many other cities in this part of the world, those of us living here in Colombo are lucky enough to live in a city without the stench and eyesores of garbage piled up along the streets. In this second report, we take a look at some of the success stories of waste management here in Sri Lanka. Here once again is Madhushka Balasuriya.
Like in many other countries, Sri Lanka's solid waste management is the responsibility of local authorities, the municipal councils, the urban councils and the Pradeshia Sabhas. However, for a long time, the garbage problem, particularly in and around Colombo, became seemingly uncontrollable. Government officials and other experts in the field have cited several factors as having contributed to the inefficiency of local authorities in addressing the garbage problem: the lack of technical and legal knowledge, the lack of infrastructure and financial constraints. As a part of the solution, Sri Lanka's Central Environment Authority launched the Pilisaru National Solid Waste Management Project in 2008. Under the program, composting plants were constructed locally at various locations around the country. The objective was to encourage communities to reutilize the disposed garbage and recycle to the maximum extent possible, and then dispose of the rest in an environmentally sustainable manner. The government budgeted 5.6 billion rupees for the 3-year program. It was reportedly the first time the Sri Lankan government funded a waste management project. In another step, the government, with Korean assistance, recently began construction on the country's first ever sanitary landfill in Dompe. With sanitary landfills, waste is first isolated from the environment until it is safe. That is, until it has completely degraded biologically, chemically and physically. In addition to government efforts, the United Nations Office for Project Services also conducts programs in waste management. One of its most successful has been the Integrated Solid Waste Management Program in Ampare. The program, run by the local authorities with support from UNOPS, handles more than half of Ampare's 210 tons of urban waste. The program has successfully implemented waste segregation, collection of segregated waste, recycling and composting. I'm Madhushka Balasuriya from the News First International Desk.
We now return to our discussion this week with Françoise Jacob from UNOPS here in Sri Lanka. In the second segment, the conversation focuses on the role of the general public. While waste management is primarily a duty of local governments, how individuals think about waste and manages the waste generated from their households has a big impact on the overall process. I'm not sure if this question is going to be a fair one for you, but it's out of curiosity, which I'm sure a lot of people watching this show might wonder about also. I remember someone did a story in New York once where they followed the trash, you know, like where does it go from my home to the end?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if people really know where their trash goes here. Can you take for an example, maybe in the city of Colombo if you're living here?
Yeah.
Just to help us understand that process.
Yeah.
Where does it go?
No, it's very interesting you ask this question, because when I talk about waste in my country, people say, oh, but it's not a problem. And I said, sure, it's not a problem because you don't see it,
Right.
you know, because the system is in place. So here in Colombo, it goes mostly to a huge landfill which is north of the city, which I'm sure a lot of people are aware of, and to some other minor illegal landfill. There is one just north of the fort area, actually, when you start going along the coast, and that's a tiny road, beautiful road, and you pass this waste, this dump site where things are leaking, you have birds, you have dogs, you have all sorts of, it's really disgusting, and it poisons the water and it poisons the air. It's just terrible.
This is one of those illegal ones?
That's one of the illegal ones. So basically, yeah, the truck comes and it takes your way, in Colombo, it takes your waste to that big dump site. Now, along the way, some of the people might pick the cardboard or the plastic and then sell it to whatever, the informal sector. And then on the land sites here, but like in other countries, you have another informal sector which is wrongly called maybe the scavengers, and these are the people who are actually working on the landfill, and they collect whatever has some value. So that can be metal, that can be plastic, anything that is recyclable or reusable. And that in itself, I mean, in a sense it's good because it provides some revenue to very poor people, but it's a huge health issue for these people, as you can imagine, especially since quite a few of them can be kids. It's a health issue, but it can also be a danger for the surrounding environment, because, for example, in Ampara we have such landfill where some scavengers were interested to collect the metal. And so to identify, to sort the metal out easily, they put the whole landfill on fire. So the whole thing was on fire during the time when there were a lot of high winds. And then it's easy for them to see the metal, to wait until it's cooled down and then to collect it. So you have a range of issues, you know, from improper landfill management. Yeah.
Now, you've worked in various parts of the country, and I'm sure in other countries as well. Can you talk a little bit about how our cultures, traditional values might come into this picture where we try to convince people of trying to change their behavior, essentially?
Yeah, interesting question. First, again, I always like to show how problems here are not necessarily just here, you know. And waste in general, dealing with waste has a psychological element which is the same everywhere. Basically, nobody wants to have the landfill in his or her backyard, whether it's an individual or a municipality. You know, so but at the same time, here, for example, in this country, people are very proud about the beauty of the country. People are very interested in having nice garden, in having a nice environment. So this is something that people understand, and they want to change it. You know, so my experience is that there is a fairly strong willingness from the different communities to change the situation. They can't do it on their own, but at least you have the concern. And the way I've seen, I mean, what I've seen over the past year and a half is you have a growing concern, because people also understand that this is going to have an effect not just on them, but on their children and on the children of their children. When the lagoons in Batticaloa or in Jaffna are completely spoiled with dirty waste, you know, where are we going? So I think there is a positive element. The one thing which is, the one action which is very simple and very effective is to work on waste with the schools. Kids love it. Because, you know, for a kid to take a plastic thing and try and imagine that it could be recycled into something useful, for them it's a game, you know. And so we have a system in some of the schools in Ampara where we have distributed some cards, point cards. And so kids bring the waste from their house, and they get points. And then after a certain number of points, they get whatever, a small gift. I don't know what it is, but and so they love it, you know. And then they have this waste day where, you know, they get briefed about, you know, what can you do with plastic to recycle, what can you do with this, what can you do with that. And like in many other important socioeconomic changes, the kids can have a big impact at home, because they come back home and they said, "Mom, you shouldn't put that here. It should go here," you know. And this is how you change the perception, and you also change the action of the people. Now, of course, to support this, or let's say to complement this, you need to have the proper action from the local authorities.
If you could give one message to people watching, you know, about how we can contribute individually to reduce this waste problem, what would it be?
Well, first, two things I would say. First is start at your home, start at your doorstep, and don't consider your neighbor's doorstep as a dump site. So keep your garbage in your own house, segregate it. Segregation is very important. And even if you think the garbage collectors don't care and put everything together in a truck, believe me, these collectors, they know the value of the different articles. So segregate it, put it in different bags, and make sure that you give your waste on a daily basis or weekly basis, whatever, in a segregated manner. It will make it much easier to process it. And the second thing is, as a citizen, lobby with your MP. You know, lobby with your chairman of your Pradesh Sabha, lobby with your mayor. Take this as an important issue.
Like many other environmental problems, waste management is also a collective effort. Every one of us has a part to play. So before we finish off for this week, perhaps we could remind you of a few things you and your family can do to help the effort. First, resist that temptation to litter. Even the smallest piece of trash in the furthest rural corner of the island can add to the problem. Second is the piece of advice our guest Françoise Jacob considered most important, and that's waste segregation. Take a little extra time to segregate your trash. Glass, metal, plastics, paper, and food waste. Put them in different bags before you keep it out for the garbage truck. It will make a huge difference. And with that, we'll end this episode of Global Perspectives. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again next week at the same time on MTV Sports. Thank you for watching. Good night.